The second part of our program is to bring together people, many of whom were involved in the mayoral race, but more importantly, involved in a long trajectory, a long sojourn in terms of resistance movements and social change movements in this city. We're very excited about this very, very powerful panel. And to moderate this panel, an activist and organizer in her own right is Kennedy Bartley. Kennedy is the director of campaigns. Kennedy is the director of campaigns for the Chicago Torture Justice Center and chair of United Working Families Policy Committee. She is a member of the Collaborative for Community Wellness and Defund CPD and has organized and been an activist in Chicago since 2013. Kennedy was appointed to both Mayor Johnson's Overall Transition Committee and Public Safety Committee, and she will introduce the rest of the panel. Welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Barbara, and everyone behind SJI, and Jung and Rich for that really powerful panel earlier with Mayor Johnson. I'm honored to be up here with comrades and friends that I've struggled with over the years and won some things with over the years, and also to be joined by Maurice Mitchell, National Director of WFP, Working Families Party. Yep, long time organizer and strategist. So now I'm going to turn it over to my friends here and ask that you all just give brief introductions of yourselves, name, what you do, who you rep, etc.
Hi everyone, thanks Kennedy. Happy to be here and be in conversation with folks. My name is Asha. I was the Southside Field Director for United Working Families program for Brandon this cycle, and have been organizing around issues of policing, criminalization, economic and racial justice here in Chicago and nationally for the past decade, and yeah, just really excited to be in conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Ani Wamani. I am with BPNC, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council. I am a community organizer, mainly focused on the Treatment Not Trauma campaign, as you may all have heard of it. I am so happy to be here with such powerful activists and sharing this space with them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aislinn Pulley, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Chicago Torture Justice Center. And born and raised in Chicago, been organizing since I was very young in a lot of various different campaigns, including campaigns to look for some semblances of justice for families whose loved ones have been killed by police, as well as immigration and a number of other things. And so I'm honored to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Peace. G2 Brown, proud son of the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. Been an organizer most of my adult life, and now I organize nationally with the Journey for Justice Alliance, particularly around education justice. A lot of my work has been around youth investment and then parent organizing, and particularly to stop school privatization.
Awesome, thank you so much, y'all. And you know, the folks up here have been instrumental both to this last electoral cycle, but also behind many of the struggles and fights that got us to this particular political moment. And now that we're in this unique inflection point within the Chicago context, I'd really love to hear about some of you all's freedom dreams, right? Like thinking about your organizing work and the work that you've been doing around key issues, and just wondering like what are your freedom dreams for Chicago on a structural level, on a transformative level, not just like the the TNTs and the BCHs, but like the larger things. What does Chicago look like in your freedom dream? Asha, you want to start?
Thanks for that question, Kennedy. So I want to say two things. The first one is about public safety. So the mayor, we just heard talk about, this addiction that our society has on prisons and policing. I think we saw through this election cycle a really sensationalized, polarized, and animated kind of debate around what do we mean by this thing that is public safety. And we've seen some of the ideas put forward by our movement really, really demonized. And I think that's because of, some of the freedom dreams that we have and what a threat that is to the status quo. So I'm excited in this moment to be, really moving forward and thinking about what does it look like now that we have a little bit more power to try to move toward that freedom dream. And so thinking about, that we make it common sense to understand this idea that public safety is when people have their needs met, and policing is this thing that happens when we're actually already unsafe. And so what that understanding of what that, becoming a common sense, what that understanding tells us is that we actually deserve robust public institutions rooted in care, humanity, that are both accessible and equitably built. And that's actually the conversation. If we're talking about communities being safe, that's actually where we need to start, and not actually in a conversation about policing at all. And so that needs to inform how investments are made, how crises are responded to, right? If we think about, an immediate response to some type of crisis, when there is a crisis or an incident, that should activate and trigger so much more than or instead of a police response, right? It's saying, well, do the people involved have access to housing, to the health care that they need? Why are people vulnerable to whatever crisis in the first place? And like, we've heard Mayor Johnson say before, like, we need to ask better questions, not how do we step in and punish or react to whatever has happened, but how do we actually make it so that whatever crisis, whatever injustice, whatever harm actually doesn't happen ever again. And that looks like, institutions across the board responding in a moment of crisis, and taking those opportunities to look at what can we invest in more long term. And yeah, I think that orientation to those types of questions leads us to better answers when it comes to public safety. And so it's not actually just a question of the police budget being too big, but of the budgets of everything else being too small, right? We can't actually solve the problem of public safety talking about policing. We have to also be talking about housing, about food access. The vision is, right, there should be a public space that's free, that's accessible, with programs, with stuff to do, with access to whatever someone might need within walking distance in every neighborhood in the city of Chicago. Like, that's a thing that should exist, and that's what public safety looks like to me. The second thing is really about shifting the balance of power. And the other thing that Mayor Johnson said that I wanted to reference is just this idea of needing us. And Jung and Rich really engaging in that conversation about co-governance. And so I think it's great that we get people that we believe in the inside, in City Hall, to advocate for us. And I think my vision really is that we've shifted the balance of power so that communities have the power to not just inform, but shape and make decisions that impact our lives, to put people in power, to take people out of power, and to set agendas. And so that is something that requires a lot of different types of transformation. One, it requires a cultural transformation. I think we, as people in the city of Chicago, have been conditioned and lived in a reality where we don't get to inform decisions that impact our lives, right? A development comes into your neighborhood, you don't get a say in it. A budget is passed, maybe there's like a survey, but like that doesn't really mean anything. Like, we are not actually conditioned to be political participants in the decisions that impact our lives. And so there's like a cultural transformation of how do we see ourselves as responsible for shaping the political reality that we live in. It similarly requires a political transformation where then there are mechanisms where you get to inform a decision that's being made that impacts your community or your city. That's not a meaningless survey or a forum where the format doesn't allow for real public comment, but it's that we really lean into this piece of whatever Mayor Johnson's administration is going to build out around community engagement, that is a space where people get to shape decisions that impact their lives. And then lastly, it looks like organizing, right? When either of those two things are not in place, that we kind of, can organize, can take action, and can challenge whatever is happening. I was a part of organizing a big post-election community a meeting on the south side. We had like 150 people that were all really involved in the organizing around Brandon on the south side, many of whom had been involved for a long time, and a lot of folks who were new. And I heard from many people in that room, like, I've never been to anything like this. And that just like shouldn't be true for so many people in our city, that you've never been in a room where people ask you, what are the issues that matter in your neighborhood? And like, tell you, I'm gonna take this to the mayor, and like, we're gonna keep building and talking and understanding how, our collective interests, or moving and activating and being connected around our collective interests can be a source of power. So yeah, I think that's an important piece of it.
And why don't we just go down the line, Ani, Aislinn, G2, engaging this question of what your freedom dream looks like. Thank you so much for that, Asha.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, Asha. That was really powerful. Definitely, I do feel that all of our movements are so interconnected. We all build on each other. And well, it comes to now, like, my freedom dream for Chicago is one that actually includes a robust public health infrastructure. This dream embraces the notion that mental health care should be a fundamental human right and an integral part of a just and compassionate society. As a mother, a student, and current organizer, this dream is what I dream for us and our future generations, and one we're actually pushing through the city of Chicago. This dream is giving Chicagoans treatment, not trauma. Treatment Not Trauma recognizes the hundreds of people who organized as part of the mental health movement in 2013. Our community members who have actually been very vulnerable in sharing their stories and experiences with mental health care in Chicago. And before that, movement leaders who tried to stop the closures of the public mental health centers by mayors Emanuel and Daley. The political class thought that they could ignore us, but here we are, still here. Our current infrastructure is failing us, and I think we all know that. We're not receiving the care that we need. We've been deprived over and over again from the disinvestments the political class chose to make us suffer through. Chicago has continuously failed to acknowledge these, and it is time that we come together and make actionable change with this very unique opportunity we actually have in City Hall. But let us not forget that when people come together, we do win, but when we win, it's also our responsibility to stay grounded. It's our responsibility to stay in touch with our movements. It's our responsibility to ensure that these movements are implemented properly and essentially become a successful implementation as well. And again, we may call this a dream, but it is the future of our city. Treatment Not Trauma is a dream I wish to become a reality, to reopen our shuttered public mental health centers and establish a citywide, non-police crisis response. Reopening and revitalizing our public mental health centers across Chicago would offer a comprehensive range of services from prevention and early intervention to crisis response and actual long-term care. For our marginalized communities suffering from these disinvestments that have resulted from all the political decisions. An infrastructure that is actually transparent, keeps our city accountable, and ensures we're actually receiving these services while being effectively managed and adequately funded. These centers are about accessibility and affordability to make mental health care available to everyone, no matter your zip code, your immigration status, your housing situation, socioeconomic status, or if you have insurance or not. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and ultimately be cared for. This freedom dream, thank you. This freedom dream also includes the citywide non-police crisis response system, implemented through the whole city of Chicago, not just 7 neighborhoods, not 10, not 15, all 77 neighborhoods of Chicago. We all need to be represented and cared for. It would be trained professionals such as mental health clinicians and social workers being dispatched to crisis situations instead of law enforcement. It recognizes that mental health crisis requires compassion and more than just, compassionate support than punitive measures, because having a mental health illness is not a crime. This freedom dream brings justice to the people who are no longer with us because the system failed them. Laquan McDonald, Irene Chavez, Walter Wallace Jr., Ricardo Muñoz, Angelo Quinto, Jada Johnson, Helen Morley, Jordan Neely, and the many more we don't hear about in the news. Ultimately, this dream seeks to transform the mental health infrastructure and landscape in Chicago. It envisions a society that values mental health care as a crucial component of our overall well-being, where no one is left behind or deprived of essential care due to systematic disparities. By uplifting accessibility, expanding services, and adopting a compassionate and non-punitive crisis response, we can actually create a city where the freedom to seek and receive mental health care is a reality for all.
Thank you so much, Ani. Aislinn?
Yeah, thank you, Ani. I love that. I really struggled with answering this question, so just bear with me. But one of those unnamed people whose life was lost by the police was my best friend's youngest brother, Gregory Tucker, who was killed by CPD when we were 18. And we all grew up together. We lived right next door to each other across the alley and had been in each other's lives since my best friend and I were 8 years old. And so when he was murdered, we were in our senior year of high school, and me, a child of organizers, my father had been forced to go to the Army after being called a black militant, and a judge said, go to prison or go to the Army. And so he went to the Army, and then he organized against the Vietnam War and was incarcerated for that. So me, a child of organizers, it didn't even dawn on me at 18 when Gregory was killed that we could do anything. And I say that to say that we have dramatically shifted the ground of what is acceptable and what is normal, both in the city and in the country, particularly in response to policing. Now there are families, Arewa sitting right here in the second row, who is one of our first elected civilian representatives on our new civilian board to hold police accountable. It's not a board, I know, I'm messing up the name, but has been organizing. I met Arewa the day after her grandnephew was murdered by Sean Hitz, CPD officer, on April in 2016. And Arewa was out in the streets along with Tam, Pierre's mother, and community, and all of Pierre's friends and family, and we marched through that neighborhood. It is now known that people can and should respond when police kill. That is a fundamental and dramatic shift that has happened over the last 20 and 30 years, which is really important. Prior to 2016, Chicago police led the country in the killing of black people, and oftentimes led the country in the killing of people in total. And it wasn't until the movement began kicking up its heels in earnest, including with Pierre, but also with Rakia. I think Brandon actually mentioned Rakia earlier, I'm not sure. But the groundwork was slowly laid by really black youth and young folks in the city refusing to remain silent and demanding accountability that we hadn't seen prior, that I didn't even think was possible when Gregory was killed. We just assumed that this was a tragic inevitability. Me, a child of organizers, didn't even think that we should have done something. And so now we have shifted what's normal and what's expected, and that has resulted in a shift in the relations between the people and the police, and the people and the system. And so now post-2016, when CPD had led the country most years in the killing of people by police, we now, as of last year, in 2022, had 2 police killings. 2 police killings. Based on our records, that's the lowest that we've have ever experienced. It should be 0. It will be 0. So one of my freedom dreams is that we will be 0. We will be like the rest of the world where their police forces don't kill their population. We can and we will get there. And so what we're doing is we're rewriting the rules. We are creating new pathways for what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. One of the most profound things I experienced was on May 6, 2015, sitting in the chambers of City Hall when City Council unanimously passed the reparations ordinance for survivors of police torture, which I want to shout out Joey Mogo somewhere in here, who was the author of that ordinance, and one of the attorneys leading the fight as part of the People's Law Office. And at that moment, I couldn't believe that we had won this. I had been used to fighting for things that we don't win, and that we fight because it's a protracted struggle, and the principle is in building that long history of struggle and resistance for our eventual win. But we actually won it. And what we didn't know was that and part of what was so incredibly transformative about that ordinance is that it did a number of things. There was a very small financial compensation, but the most important aspects of it was that it created a curriculum, it demanded a curriculum be created for all Chicago public schools to teach about the history of policing and torture in 7th, 8th, and 10th grade social studies classes. It provides for free access to city colleges for survivors and their families, including their grandchildren. It created a center located on the South Side to treat the psychological impact of torture. And that is the Chicago Torture Justice Center where I work. We didn't know then that we were creating the country's first and only center dedicated to treating domestic torture. So there are so many lessons in our wins that we don't yet know. What we're now fighting for and what Brandon has campaigned and agreed to allow happen, which Lori Lightfoot and Rahm Emanuel refused to create, which is the public memorial. And so what we're hoping for now is that we are not going to remain the first and only center. It's by design that we are the first and only. It's because all of the rest of the centers which exist, of which there are about 15, 16 torture centers in the country, are federally limited to treat international torture survivors. But that we know that that's purposeful, right? But we also know that because there aren't other centers, that we aren't truly appreciating the magnitude of the violence and the consequences of the violence that it has on our communities. So we need more. There are so many people wounded and who have experienced the violence of police in the city and across the country. And so Chicago has had such an important place in history historically, from establishing the 8-hour work week to the creation of the first reparations ordinance of its kind in the country, to now having the largest socialist city council people in the country, to creating our first civilian accountability thing that I can't remember the name of, council. I'm sorry. To so many other things, right? We unseated Rahm, we unseated Lori, we unseated all of Anita Alvarez. We were the first in the country to get rid of our prosecutor, right? We have been at the forefront of rewriting what it means to live in this society. And I'm wrapping up, we are now at about the 40, 50-year existence of neoliberalism dominating, the way that capitalism operates in the world, which issued in mass incarceration. That is a very recent creation. In 1971, the incarceration population in the United States was on par with that of the rest of the rich world. It was not starkly different. We now house the largest incarcerated population in history and of any other country. We need to be at the forefront of correcting that, which is destabilizing that and destroying it. So part of what the next 4 years should encompass is us really getting deep. When Brandon said now is not the time to sit back, that is critically important. We have to be in the streets, we have to be demanding change, we have to be tearing down these walls. All that work to incarcerate our folks. And it's gonna take a lot of work. It's gonna take a lot of work. But we have so many things that we need in our society. The fear is always, well, what's gonna happen when people lose their jobs in relation to the carceral system, like policing or COs or other things like that. But the reality is that we need so much. What Ani was talking about, we need so many mental health care professionals. We need so many crisis professionals. What Asha was talking about, we need so many people who are ready to deal with the realities of living. We need affordable housing. We need healthcare workers. We need teachers. We need to reopen the schools that were massively closed. All of those things require trained individuals, and that's where we need to be focusing our work and our attention. And so we can create a new society, a different society that has a different set of rules that has, up to this point, been governed by policing. We can create a society that is actually governed by and governed for our people and meeting the needs of our people. And so my freedom dream is that this is a beginning of that. And that we do not sit back and relax and say that we have won and therefore our work is done, but that we actually step forward and get into the trenches and start digging up all of the remnants, because all those state's attorneys, assistant state's attorneys that locked up all the hundreds of torture survivors, some of whom are still incarcerated, are still there and becoming judges. So our work is far from over. We need to overturn and uproot all these people and create a new Chicago.
Thank you so much, Ace. And Brother GT, you want to close us out for the Chicago organizer Freedom Dreams?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
I'm going to cheat.
This is the first time I've been called ma'am publicly. Thank you.
Indeed.
I'm getting old.
I'm a cheat. Just I'm a cheat. Okay, so Aislinn was speaking my heart. Everybody was, as they were laying out their freedom dream. But Aislinn really moved me when she began to connect the different quality of life institutions, because many of us in the organizing world are often guided by philanthropy. So you get funded to work on this issue or that issue or this issue, and that becomes our worldview without understanding that there's a belief system, a value system that poisons every quality of life institution in our community that most of white America takes for granted, right? So most of white America don't have to worry about slumlords. Most, not all, but most of white America have not had to deal with their schools being shut down. Or down the street from your house, you got 3 liquor stores, but you don't have a grocery store. And so I think it's important as we go into this moment where we're saying that we can't relax. There's a lesson to learn from Valparaiso, Chile. Valparaiso, Chile, if folks know, there was a youth movement in Chile starting as early as 2007. And they just elected the mayor of Chile, who came directly from the youth movement. Like Brother Brandon comes directly from the education justice movement. But they are in a moment of reflection, saying that the biggest mistake they made is that they relaxed. And we must remember where we live, and that this is the place that has turned the murder of Black and indigenous people into a sick science, where You know, there was a great book written by Dr. Bobby Wright called The Psychopathic Racist Personality. It's one of the best books I ever read, all of 18 pages maybe. But the analysis is so clear that when it comes to black life, America is psychopathic. And it could now, you know, somebody that's psychotic looks like they need support. But a psychopath can be a principal, they can be a mayor, they can be a president, they can be a judge, they can raise families, but when they see you, there is a sickness. They don't see you. And that's what we're dealing with. So, you know, as old African proverbs say, the truth is simple, if it's complicated, it's a lie. So we have to be honest, because if we're not being honest, then we don't build the infrastructure that protects us. The question has to be, what will we leave the next generation other than problems? And we got a moment right now to get it right. So yes, we should be in the streets. We should be pushing our good brother. And that's a brother that on the third week of the hunger strike joined us in the hunger strike to save Diet High School. I've blocked elevators with this brother. I've shut down school board meetings with this brother. And with the quickness, if we have to, we will be at City Hall. That's right. Not because we don't trust and believe him, but he needs that in order to, as they said in the old school, stay on your square. So, what was the question? Oh, my vision. My vision for, or my vision dream for education, I think the first thing you got to do is you got to define education. I hear all these people talking about education, but I never hear people say what is it? And education is not to prepare young people to be spokes in the wheel of white supremacy. It's not to prepare them to just be workers. So in the Journey for Justice Alliance, we are a national organization of grassroots community-based organizations. We have member groups in about 38 cities around the country. And our definition of education is as follows. Education is inspiration and information that prepare people to impact the world. That's simple. Inspiration and information that prepare people to impact the world. So if that's our definition, then we want to create that in Chicago. We say that everybody, raise your hand if you pay taxes. Everybody here need to have their hand up. Because if you buy a bag of potato chips, you pay taxes. So everybody who pays taxes, you have the right to a world-class pre-K through 12th grade system of education within safe walking distance of your home. That's it. And for those that know our history, because often people talk about DIAB, which I often said, we've been dealing with, and people talk about the 50 schools that Rahm Emanuel closed, but you forgot about the other 110 that closed before that. So housing and education are the two primary institutions that have been weaponized to purge black people from the city of Chicago. And see, we're kind of in shock because we're living through it right now. But this is going to go down in history about the push out of black people from urban spaces. Because if you go to New Orleans, we're about 49% of the population. You go to Chocolate City, we're about 45% of the population. It's about 78% of Chocolate City, right? Go to Oakland, birthplace of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. We're about 24% of the population. It used to be about 55%. I can go on. Across this country, they have weaponized our basic quality of life institutions to reverse white flight and to push us out of these cities and to decrease our political power in these spaces. And so our position is that we got to bring this, Chicago must again become a soul city. This was a soul city. You know, if you listen to James Brown records, right? And you know, he got this what it is, what it is. Now, but in what it is, he's sitting there talking about, and he's using this language. B-More, South Side of Chicago, D-Town. Y'all get my point? There was these cities that were considered soul cities, that no matter where you went, you knew your people was there. Have you ever gone to a club called Mabel's in Baltimore? I have, and I'm not even a club person. But you walk in there, and they frying catfish in the back, And they listen to you, and you know you with your people. Chicago used to be one of those spots. I'm joking, but I'm not. And for us, it was part of our culture, the places that we knew we could go. You can go in D.C., and you knew when you go on U Street in D.C., and you knew your folk was there. You knew you had a home. So the purge of us out of American cities is going to continue if we continue to look at things singularly. We have to realize that what we're all talking about is safety, housing, education, dealing with what does safety look like in our communities. We're talking about it from a different belief system. What does that look like? What does a world look like what does a Chicago look like that is finally governed from a human place? Where white supremacy is, remember this is the place where John Burge put that the city of Chicago, he electrocuted black men into confessions. A lot of El Rookins. Can I tell the truth, brother? A lot of Blackstone Rangers ended up locked up for decades. This is the same place where Mayor Daley said shoot to kill. This is the same place where Rahm Emanuel tried to cover up Laquan McDonald. This is where Martin Luther King said he had never seen hate like he saw in Chicago. This is where you live. That value system hasn't changed. Did it change when Lori Lightfoot tried to shut down the young people at the police hearing when didn't nobody really know who she was? And she could front like she was progressive, but she was always machine. She was just in the background. And when Rekia Boyd's brother tried to get up and speak, she shut that brother down. I was there. And I'm going to close with this. I was also there for this moment. Because I want y'all to understand that I'm trying to use humor, but we're very serious. They always say that young people will lead the way. So I want you to understand that we've been in many more school closing fights than Diet. Diet was the one that made national news and was one of Rahm Emanuel's first defeats, right? So it was important. But I want you to understand that on the 32nd day of that hunger strike, we were struggling. Miss Irene had been hospitalized twice. Jeanette, who's now the alderwoman of the 20th Ward, had passed out at a school board hearing. The city of Chicago was sending people to disrupt what we was doing. They sent a cap to Washington Park to fight us, right? So we were and I'm struggling because they looking at me. I'm the organizer, and I was almost out of answers. I didn't know what to do. And then so usually we slept at Operation Push, but this one night we said we'd go home. So I dragged myself home, passed out in Menards. I went to Menards with my partner and was walking, and before I knew it, she was helping me up. Now, then I get a phone call, and it's Sister Anna Jones, she crying. She's like, the young people coming, you gotta get here, Brother G2. So I don't know where I found the strength, because I live in Austin. I drove from the west side all the way to 35th Street, and I saw hundreds of young people in the street, and it was called Rekia to Diet. I want you to hear me now. The understanding that this was the same issue. The clarity that had not been anesthetized yet, like it's been in us. These young people understood that the murder of Rekia Boyd is direct, and the lack of accountability to the public is the same as the sabotage and close of Diet High School, because that's where you want to put the Obama Presidential Center and push us out the neighborhood faster. And those young people marched and met us with love. Until I am back in the dirt, I'll remember that day. I'll remember it. And that sister got up there and sang that song, and I wish I could see that sister again. My Black is Beautiful. And this girl was cold, and she was singing. She was like, sing that shit. And she was getting it. It was just a moment, but it was a moment of consciousness that we can't forget. Our struggle ain't about one issue, family. Our struggle is about looking at a Chicago that no matter what color you are, what neighborhood you're from, everything you need to meet your basic needs so you can stand on your parents' shoulders, everybody has. Zero tolerance for, peep game, zero tolerance for racism. Because we've learned how to, I got you, we've learned how to swallow rape. We've digested it. Zero tolerance for poverty, not zero tolerance for the poor. Zero tolerance for poverty, zero tolerance for sexism. Y'all understand? We have learned to digest the undigestible because we believe that these people are powerful, but they are not. When I met Rahm Emanuel face to face, I couldn't believe this to do this. I could put this dude in my pocket. I could put this dude in my pocket. Make it choke. Because the truth is this. The truth is this. We have been processed to think that you hear us talk like it. Very powerful interests. When the truth is, when we stomp, the world shake. But we don't stomp because we don't believe we got the right to, but you do. And it's a gray-haired brother telling you, you're right to be pissed off. You're right to be mad. You're right to want the world to be different. But you got to have the will to do it. The will, W-I-L-L. Nobody cares how articulate you are. Nobody cares how great your proposals look. But will you say, you know, you crossed this line, I got something for you. And mean it. And mean it. And mean it. And so I'm honored to be here, and I think that this work with our good brother is an incredible moment. But sisters and brothers, don't remember that in 2014, a woman named Karen Lewis was going to run for mayor. And I always invoke my sister's name because I love her and I miss her. And she would have won. And we all know it. We all know it. The moment we in right now, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later. This is a moment that has been won because of battles left and right. This is because the justice movement is kind of on swole. You know, we've been doing our push-ups. We've been, you know, we've been lifting a little. This ain't David versus Goliath no more. Do y'all hear me? This ain't David versus, and excuse my slang. I'm at the university. This is not David versus Goliath anymore. It's a fight, and you got to realize your own power and your own strength.
All right, thank you so much, G2. Appreciate, you know, the historical context within Chicago, but also the important naming of issues globally as well, particularly, you know, bringing Chile into the conversation and recognizing, you know, Chicago as the birthplace of neoliberalism and Chile as a site of the experimentation of that, you know, and now all these years later, just now usurping or, you know, getting rid of that administration, and then us close to follow. And so, you know, my hope is that this conversation is as expansive and not as provincial as just Chicago, because, you know, we are creating this radical municipalism and these oases, and we are still complicit and a part of struggles both globally and nationally. And so I briefly introduced him before, but I want to, thank you so much to our comrade and brother, Mo Mitchell, for being here. I want to just give a slightly longer introduction, and then Mo ask you a slightly different question. So Mo is a longtime activist and organizer whose career as an organizer began as a student. His life was transformed when he responded to the uprising against the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. He relocated to Ferguson and helped build a movement that had global implications, founding a movement support group called the Blackbird and co-founding the Rising Majority. He then assumed the helm of Working Families Party in 2018 and has been working hard to get progressives elected across the country. So thank you so much, you know, Mo, for flying in and joining us today. And you know, with that, I'd like to ask you to provide some national context for this local work, you know, specifically linking Chicago to the nation, to the challenges progressive mayors and elected officials are facing, and the victories that have occurred, and why this victory in Chicago is so important, but also what's at stake. So,
Thank you. It's a true honor. And good afternoon, everyone. Okay. So I was so moved by everything everybody had to say and by your freedom dreams. And I'm just gonna share some context from the work that I do. So for those that don't know, I'm the National Director of the Working Families Party. Right on. The Working Families Party is an independent, multi-tendency, non-sectarian left political party that seeks to be a third political force in US politics. And we're grounded by the power of labor unions and people's organizations. And we help to elect independent progressives like Brandon up and down the ballot all across the country. And just trying to weave some of the themes that you all brought in. So I want to take a little step back and talk, I heard mention of neoliberalism. And, when I think about where we are more than 40 years into the neoliberal experiment, and I think about globally the fact that working people everywhere are experiencing what it's like to be disinvested from, what it's like to have the commons disinvested from, all across the world. And this is deliberate. This isn't by chance. This isn't just happening in Chicago. This isn't just happening in the United States. This is a global economic system. And the deliberate disinvestment in government so that then you could point to government and say it doesn't work. And therefore, we need to privatize functions of government, like education. And what happens when you disinvest from mental health and when you disinvest from education, well then, by necessity, you have to invest in jails, prisons, and police. And so working people everywhere feel a sense of insecurity, economic insecurity and physical insecurity. But they're often told by status quo forces not to believe your eyes and ears, that things are okay, that the markets are up. And what has happened around the world, this is true in the United States, this is true everywhere, is that right-wing forces, the far right, right-wing populists have seized that opportunity. The neoliberals have not delivered at all for working people. In fact, working people are working harder than ever and achieving less than ever, are feeling a sense of alienation, are feeling more disrupted than ever. And so the right wing is saying, you should believe your eyes and ears. And the right wing is saying, yes, this economic system doesn't work for you. And oftentimes, these right-wing forces are ethno-nationalists or white supremacists. So then they tell a story about who's stealing from you, right? And it's often the other, right? And so that's where Trump and his movement comes in. But it's not just Trump in the US, it's Bolsonaro in Brazil, it's Viktor Orban in Hungary, it's the right wing in many, many other countries. And then what we on the left must do, of course, is fight fascism. So we join these united fronts that include many of the people that brought us here. We join these broad united fronts to defeat fascism. And it's our duty to do that. And so that's job number one. But oftentimes, as we join these united fronts, they tell us to quiet down, right? And to not have a sharp critique of capitalism, to not have a sharp critique of neoliberalism, in an interest to be part of this broad united front against fascism. And so you might hear some folks in the Democratic Party say that, like, get in line so that we could defeat, which is clearly a fascist movement, right, in the right wing and the Trump movement, because these forces always existed in the Republican Party coalition, right? But they have now gone from the margins of the Republican Party coalition to be the leading faction, right? And they want governing power, and take them seriously and literally. What they want to do with governing power is what they're saying they want to do with it. And when they have state power, we're seeing what they're doing with it. The the truly genocidal anti-trans legislation, right? The further disinvestment, dramatic disinvestment from education, and then the banning of books and this myth around CRT is a ideological spear in order to deliver the ideological education of the far right. All this is happening around us. And I'm going to get to why Chicago is so important in a second, right? And so it's not enough to fight fascism, although that is required. And the reason why it's not enough is that working people everywhere are growing more and more cynical about politics, more and more cynical around the idea that government can actually produce something of value for them. And that's good for the right wing. The more and more cynical and disconnected and withdrawn for politics working people are, the more and more the right wing is able to fill that vacuum, and corporations are able to fill the vacuum that a broken down system and a disinvested system leaves behind. And the more they convince people on the left that we just need to get along in order to fight the fascists, the more there aren't clear examples that there is an alternative for working people. And the coalition that was built around Brandon Johnson and the victory in Chicago is demonstrating that there can be potentially an alternative for working people. And so that's why this is actually a historic opportunity in the context of the country and really the world, right? The left needs to demonstrate that we aren't afraid of power and that we seek to govern. And I run a political party. My job isn't to win elections. My job is to ensure that working people govern. Elections simply enable that to happen. So I really appreciated when I heard everybody say that the job isn't done. The election is a process victory that enables us to actually govern. And I heard one of the questions we talked about co-governance, right? Well, you know, I use the language of co-governance, but in some ways, it's not that deep. Most status quo politicians are in a co-governance relationship with organized capital. So all we're seeking to do is to create the conditions where our elected officials could be in a co-governing relationship with the people. How radical is that, right? And we actually have an opportunity here to do that. We have many, many opportunities, but what is required from the folks in this audience and the folks in this movement is to occupy a different posture and to flex a different muscle. So if we're not interested in governance, then essentially what we're saying is that we don't believe we could be in power, and that we are comfortable being in a perpetual posture of protest. And if you're perpetually in protest, that is basically ceding power to somebody else. So we have to learn how to be in a posture where the mayor is not the target, but the mayor is a comrade that we have to struggle with, engage in principled struggle, a comrade that we might not always see eye to eye with, but that requires a different flex. Does that make sense? You know, and that's an opportunity, and all of us around the country are going to be learning from the examples of Chicago, but we're already learning because the coalition that was built wasn't built overnight. You all talked about all of the various victories that led to this victories and some of the losses that led to this victory. And so this has been so helpful to me as I travel around the country, and we win some, we lose some. Our progress is not linear, and also our opponents learn from our victories as well. This is a chess match, it's not checkers, right? So I'm able to be in relationship with people's organizations, and like United Working Families. I'm proudly wearing the T-shirt, right? And also people's unions that are independent and truly left, like the CTU. And I could tell the story about how, as the left, we should have these freedom dreams that are about transforming social relations and transforming our society, but we need to make sure that our feet are planted firmly in a sober assessment of our own power, so that we could day to day do the inglorious, often not very sexy organizing work of building coalition, of creating people's organizations on the community level, of bringing in labor organizations. This victory could not have happened without SEIU and CTU and grassroots organizations and other folks. This couldn't have happened without the movement that pushed back on the idea that policing is common sense, like you said, and the idea that we can disinvest from these systems and invest in our people. I want to end on that common sense piece because the right wing is really good at finding local examples and then nationalizing it. We have an opportunity to do the same thing here. This is a local example of what it looks like potentially when the people can govern. And what would it look like if we nationalized it? That, in some ways, we have a crisis of imagination for grassroots movements in the US because we've been beaten down so much. This is a beacon of what we could do if we're serious about governing, serious about organizing, and have a long view. One last, I think I'm probably getting close to my time, right? Okay, I'm good, great. One last thing I want to leave you with is this idea that, I think, and you mentioned it, that as our cities are being disinvested from, that Black folks are basically leaving our cities. This reality that gentrification is having a serious and damaging impact on all of our cities. In fact, cities around the world. This could be a governing experiment in reversing all of that. Reversing all of it. We actually have the opportunity to do that, but we can't get caught into like what I call it like left cynicism, where we don't allow ourselves to actually believe that we could construct the politics to make that happen. And I like to remind people, think back at 2000, I'll end here. How many people were around, I think most people were around 2008? People remember that? I don't know what you're all doing. But after that election, yeah, somebody from here got elected president, right? So after that election, well, not from here, but he stayed here for a little while. But after that election, there were very smart people, academics, journalists, people who get paid to say smart things, who were talking, like having discourse about the end of racism. People remember that? Okay. Also, that presidential victory resulted in a veto-proof majority in the Senate, right? A filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, right? And the Democrats had a vast majority in the House. So the Democrats could have passed any legislation they wanted to, right? Obama had won rural counties all across the country, places that we now call Trump country, right? That was a reality within our lifetime. And if I had in 2008 said, you know what, in the not too distant future, the reality show guy Donald Trump would be president, he'd be running on an explicitly white nationalist platform. He will usher in a whole set of politics that will live on without him. And then he will produce many, many more of him all around the country. These places that Obama had won, they're gonna go dramatically to the right, and not just to the right, to the white, nationalist, racist right. You would have laughed me out of this room if I said that was surely going to happen. But that did happen. And how did that happen? It happened because there were some Republican strategists who were on the periphery of that movement who decided that they weren't going to fall into the cynicism of defeat. They were going to pick themselves up, and they were going to organize and construct the politics of the future. And they made that happen. And that lesson from Steve Bannon and Steve Miller and others who figured out how to get themselves to the White House, to me, that should inspire us. Because what it demonstrates is that our politics are not static. Our politics are constructed. And right now we're in a crossroads in this country, in Chicago and around the world, about where we're going to go, about what vision will take hold. because we're dealing with really big things. We're dealing with existential crises like climate change, right? And neoliberalism has proven that it does not have a response to that. So are we going to move into an eco-fascist or eco-socialist direction? That hasn't been decided. Change will happen. The direction is determined by the people who decide to construct the politics of the future. And those people necessarily cannot be cynical. They have to be dreamers, but they also have to be practical. And then I'm gonna end where we began, with common sense. So that's about creating the common sense. The common sense of neoliberalism is the common sense we swim in, so our ideas are framed as being ideological and as being dogmatic. But the most ideological, dogmatic people, the most ideological, dogmatic, and destructive movement today are the moderates, right? But because they have constructed the common sense, everything they do feels the most balanced. But how can you hear that $1 of white wealth translates to 1 cent of black wealth and 8 cents of brown wealth, and then come up with, let's just keep on doing what we're doing? That is the most radical, dogmatic, ideological response to that reality, right? And so our job is to make our solutions, which are the most common sense, we need to recapture the language and the ideas of pragmatism. Because our ideas, they may come from the left, but they're the most pragmatic solutions to a system that is designed to kill us. And so with that, let's construct the politics of the future based on the governing example in Chicago. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Maurice. Yeah, I think our coalitions have begun to embrace this idea of governing power that recognizes that there are many realms of power that we must contest for. Elections being one of them, which is aligned kind of, Maurice, with what you're naming as this election is a process victory. And now we have to, do what we can with the co-governance space that we've been given. Many of the folks on stage, have deep experience with organizing, and now, should we choose to, we are being tasked with the job of figuring out co-governance, or in many ways, contentious co-governance. And I'm curious for the folks on stage, Asha names it as a need for a cultural and political transformation. What does an inside-outside strategy mean to you? And importantly, how does your work shift under this new context? What does your work look like now? So anyone who wants to hop in, Asha, it looks like you're reaching. Do it. Do it. No, you got it.
Anyone else can jump in. This is on, right? Yeah. So I appreciate how Mo said that most politicians have been in a co-governing relationship. It's just not been with us. And I think that's like a really important and helpful grounding. And then I think just to start by building a little bit on this point around the coalition that we're in and, the coalitions that we're up against, right? So like neoliberalism as the status quo came to be through a multi-decade coalition of people on the inside and outside that decided to take power and create this common sense. And I think it took a big coalition to get to this point of getting, Brandon in office. And I think it's important to remember that, and now being true on the inside and the outside, we're not new to one another. I was a baby organizer when there was a big conference here at UIC where Karen Lewis was on stage with Angela Davis, and the crowd started chanting, "Run, Karen, run," right? And at that point in time, you saw young people who were, I was a part of a group called Students Against Mass Incarceration, young people who were organizing around police violence, like forming, this was right after Ferguson, so we're like forming Black youth organizations, like very, budding roots of the organizing that happened around Rakia Boyd, in the room with CTU folks, and we were like very much not on the same page between labor and like the Black youth organizing movement. Like we were not in coalition like we are now. But, I think there was enough unity and enough of different community groups, different communities, different organized forces having been hurt by Rahm Emanuel, in particular, from, the school closings to the mental health closures, to the cover-up of Laquan McDonald, to create the political reality where he couldn't run again, right? Aislinn named that as a movement victory, and I think that's important, but we weren't in a position to work together at the scale that we did in the past several months to put someone forward that we could run, right? You don't, we knocked on 500,000 doors. That's like the number of people that voted in this election. Like 7 million attempts at contacting individual people. We tried 7 million times to talk to people and had a ton of conversations. And you don't mobilize at that scale in just a few months, and that type of coalition doesn't come because Brandon is nice and has corny jokes that we all whatever can repeat. That coalition existed and has been building, over the course of the whole time that I've been in movement and for longer than that. And it puts someone forward that we can then mobilize around. And so I think co-governance is just the extension of that, right? We are as in formation as we've ever been. And I think co-governance looks like continuing to flex, continuing to extend the spaces in which we can, work in coalition. That now includes a large chunk of our city council and our mayor's office. And it looks like, building the most organized communities ever, right? It's not just saying, okay, we have enough power to get someone in the mayor's office. It's saying, actually, we're not organized enough. How do we use the extended reach that we have to make sure that every person in the city of Chicago is being reached by some segment of our movement or another. And I think it's, we proved something big, right? Being outspent almost 2-to-1 in an election where I personally was bombarded with just ridiculous anti-Brandon mailers, TV ads, all of that stuff, and organizing that was built on a coalition that had been, formulating for over a decade, beat out money, TV ads, all of that. So we proved something really big about how organizing works, and how people power is more powerful than money sometimes if we're smart about it and if it's built up over a lot of time. And so co-governance is just proving that at the scale of political power in the city in a major economic center, and it's continuing to do that with labor and community groups and elected officials and young people and independent political organizations. So it's just the scaling up of our organizing at the scale of the city. I think learning about some of the transition process, I keep having the realization of the city is just a really big organization, and we've been working to figure out how to deal with organizations, build coalition, and this is just another one of them in an extended space where we have more power, where we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you so much. And Aislinn, before you hop in there too, thank you, Asha. Before you hopped in, I recognize that my question kind of presupposed that folks' work would change under this administration. So an important amendment to that question is, how will your work change under this administration opposed to others, or will it? But still, what is your response to how you are thinking about this inside-outside strategy?
Well, I'm a little bit also inspired by what Asha just said, so I'm going to try to do both. One thing I've been thinking about a lot and continue to think about is how we defend our wins. And so we've reached this point, this historic and important moment in the city. And we have reached other historic and important moments, like with the reparations ordinance that I mentioned. And at the same time, the police and the right wing and the FOP and white supremacists continue to organize to repeal the reparations ordinance and continue to organize. And when I mean organize, I mean that they have drafted multiple pieces of legislation, continue to petition in order to reincarcerate exonerated survivors. And they frame it as jumping on the exoneration train, right? And so they delegitimize and continue to deny the fact that torture existed and exists in Chicago. We still have Holman Square operating on the west side, right? That has not closed. Holman Square, if anyone isn't familiar, was a site where The Guardian, the international newspaper, The Guardian, the British newspaper, did an extensive investigation based on suing Rahm Emanuel's administration to get records that revealed that between only 4 years, a conservative number of at least 7,000 people have been disappeared in that site, and they labeled it a black site. It's still operating right now. So the right wing and you know, white nationalist, potentially fascist, some overt fascist forces have not disappeared, have not dissipated. And I think what Mo is talking about in terms of contrasting the elation that many people experience over Obama as somehow a static win, right? With Trump is an important reminder. And there are 100 critiques, millions of critiques of Obama that I think Mo kind of alluded to, just in regards to like the stability that could have happened just with the Democratic control of the House and the Senate, right? And which they did nothing with it. But that's an important reminder that the right wing, it has not been defeated and are not planning to lay down and just concede to our win. They are rapidly continuing to mobilize and organize, and they will continue to do so. So our flex and experiment in this particular kind of political power is not guaranteed to be long-lasting. In order for it to actually have some teeth, that means that we have to get in deep. And we're gonna have to continue to fight and understand you know, the forces that we're actually contending with. Edward Hanrahan, the former state's attorney that conspired with CPD and the FBI to assassinate Chairman Fred Hampton and Deputy Mark Clark, you know, never was held accountable. And it was only a year and a half after that assassination that John Burge joined the force on CPD. No police officer, including John Burge, has ever been held accountable for the torture. John Burge trained hundreds of officers under his command. And the latest one that we have research of that received a paycheck, thanks to like Kennedy and the team's research, was in 2017. None of those officers have ever been held accountable. So we have an entire system that remains intact and needs to be destabilized. And when we go after that, and we are going after them, to try to force accountability and to also provide reparations and freedoms to the people who remain incarcerated, they are gonna fight back. Because what we're talking about is a huge system, including the former Mayor Daley, who was a state's attorney at the time during John Burge's reign, including Dick Devine, including many judges who were state's attorneys during the reign of John Burge. All of those people have bloodied hands and have never been held accountable, and we are going to call them out. And they are going to fight back. So this is an important moment that we have to be ready to defend our wins and to deepen them, and not be satisfied with just having the mayor's seat, or just having someone potentially that we may be able to call a comrade, and that we have called a comrade in the mayor's office, because the police department is still there. They still receive over $1.6 billion a year, and they are gonna fight like hell if that budget is reduced. And they have been fighting like hell. And we've seen this during the election, all the dogma around defund, right? All of that is going to ramp up even more. So we have to be ready to fight back. And we have the country's first elected civilian police accountability council. And if they start holding police officers accountable for the first time in Chicago's history, that is going to be met with tremendous backlash. Tremendous backlash. When? And that's one example, right? We have so many radical ventures happening at this moment, and all of them will be hit with backlash. And so while we're prepping for like how our work is going to change, it also is how we're going to be fighting and defending to deepen these wins.
Thank you for that, Aislinn. We've got time for just one more question and probably just for one person to hop in. As I, heard you all's freedom dreams and, heard the wonderful conversation again that Rich and Jung led us through with Mayor Johnson, it's occurring to me that most of our freedom dreams can be found in the platform, right? Like, so what does it mean when our freedom dreams to, cancel ShotSpotter and get treatment, not trauma, and a fully funded memorial for survivors of police torture and bring Chicago home, right? Like, when those dreams will likely be actualized. So, like, what do dreams look like in 4 to 8 to 12 years for Chicago, with the understanding that, we will likely get the things that we thought were most visionary just some months ago? If anyone wants to hop in for that last question. Please, and we've got 2 minutes.
Okay.
Minute 50 now.
One of the, I think the biggest things is not about, to me, the issues or the policy proposals is one thing. But if it was simply about policy, then we all be good because we got the 14th Amendment. So it's got to be about the will and the power to make sure it gets implemented. So I believe that there has to be a process of reimagining Black, brown, and indigenous Chicago, revisioning it, and you do it by talking to people. If you look at the Fight to Save Mercy Hospital or the diet or whatever, I know from our standpoint, we believe what Ella Baker said many years ago. She said that oppressed people, whatever their level of education, have the ability to interpret, see the world that they're in and interpret their place in the world and move to transform it. So we don't need people who think they're smarter than people from our neighborhoods, right? The solutions are in our neighborhoods, they're there. And so I think a process of really deep engagement of Chicagoans create what you would call a conscious constituency, and of people who begin to believe that they deserve better. But, if we have an existence where people run institutions in our communities based on their opinions of us, and we don't have any examples of having power, we don't have any examples of being able to control our own destiny, then we won't believe we can do it. So I think one of the biggest things that can come from this experience to make sure that the Chicago machine never gets it back, right, is that we have to begin the process of deep engagement in youth leadership development. And like in our schools, young people should not, the student council, whatever, young people should be able to address community issues in the schools that they attend. They need to be able to have internships with community-based organizations. We have to understand that we are dealing with the wolf. And so we have to develop, our own mechanism to deal with it, right? So
Thank you so much.